Welcome to College Recruiter, where we believe that every student and recent grad deserves a great career. Today, we are going to be talking about business etiquette, particularly advising the entry-level employees. So graduates who have taken off their college hat and putting on their professional hat, we have some advice for you. I am joined by Vicky Oliver, who is the author of 301 Smart Answers to Tough Interview Questions, plus other career books. So Vicky, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't we dive right in? Because I know you have some great insight into this. You've advised entry-level employees before. What are some topics of conversation that should generally be avoided at work?
Okay, first off, I would avoid the conversation about what you did over the weekend. Remember that you're there at the office basically to work. And so some of the details of your personal life I would hold back on, especially until you have really established yourself. So that's one area I would avoid. And I would also avoid asking your fellow colleagues and employees, the people that you work for, your bosses, like what they did over the weekend. Just stay away from that topic. You don't want to get too personal too fast.
Too fast, right? So let's say that an organization has a culture of going out, maybe kind of work hard, party hard type of culture. What should employees keep in mind when they're at the bar, at the restaurant, and then similarly, what should they know about carrying that or not carrying that back to the office?
Okay, so the main thing to remember, whether you are out with your colleagues at a bar or you're at a party, an office party, is that you're still basically in the office. That's the most important thing to remember. So that dictates all kinds of behaviors, for example, how much you should drink. Now, if you have an iron stomach, I think it's okay to have 2 drinks after work with your colleagues. But if you don't, if you can't hold your liquor well, you may have to just have 1 drink or even pass on the liquor. So you have to sort of know yourself, how you react to liquor and how you comport yourself after a drink or 2. One trick I do when I go out with my colleagues, I ask the bartender to make any drink I have very light. I'm always saying, make a screwdriver for me, vodka and orange juice. Use half the vodka, because this way it will stretch it out over the period of time. Another thing you can do is drink water. Take sips of water while you have drinks. This will extend the length of your drink and you will water it down literally, which is a good thing. In terms of conversation, again, you're there, you're at the office. So you don't want to gossip or say things that you're going to regret saying later. It's not a good idea to say, oh, this is secret, keep the secret. Just don't say it. Now, you can expect that if you're out after hours with your colleagues, some people will let certain secrets slip. When that happens, you have to remember not to bring it up the next day. Don't gossip. Don't join in the gossip mill.
And the importance of this is due to the fact that your relationships with your coworkers, especially if you're new on the job, is so different than your relationships with your friends and your family. So while, Vicky, your advice actually might not be so bad for friends and family anyway, but especially with coworkers, if you go back the next day and you feel embarrassed for something you did last night, that changes things.
It changes things. And the other thing is people remember, just like you will remember when you hear a piece of gossip over a bar, maybe your boss told you something he or she shouldn't have told you, you're going to remember it. People are going to remember what you say. So just having a few drinks, you just have to remember that it doesn't really bring the barriers down. You still have to keep up the wall of decorum and remember that the people that you're drinking with are not your friends. They are your work acquaintances.
Right. So speaking of being out to eat, what advice do you have for an entry-level employee who has been invited to go to dinner with a client? What are some rules to apply there?
Okay, so the first thing I would do is, first of all, that's great news. It means you're doing well at your job. So first, pat yourself on the back. Then I would Google that person before you go out to dinner with them. You don't want to be in the situation of saying things like, what do you do? How long have you worked at the company? You don't want to ask those kinds of remedial questions. Likely, the person that you go out to dinner with will Google you and find out information about you. You should return the favor so that you have something interesting to discuss with that person. Mm-hmm. That said, and I say this in my book, 301 Smart Answers to Tough Business Etiquette Questions, you should always steer away from business if you can. It may seem counterintuitive. You're there at a business dinner with a client. Why wouldn't you want to talk about business? Well, because A, it's a little bit boring, and B, you may not be empowered to actually make any decisions about business. So it's just better to try to talk to the man or woman about other things. Have they seen any good movies lately? Or maybe when you Google them, you'll find out about a hobby they have, which you can talk about. Or maybe you will find an article that they wrote that you can discuss. Try to not talk about business over a business dinner. It just gets really dull, really fast, kind of boring. Think of it as an opportunity for you to get to know that person better in a more personal way, and for that person to know you better in a more personal way, so that later your business relationship with that person will be smoother and better.
Right. It's about building the relationship. The dinner is building the relationship. I think this is generally
all about the relationship. It's not about the business at hand. And you can really sink a business dinner fast by talking about the sort of mundane, day-to-day business details. Don't do that. Mm-hmm. Google the person, learn a little bit about the person, ask some interesting questions about the person, and be prepared to answer some questions about yourself, too, that are not totally business related.
Good advice. I think that's generally hard for Americans. We like to get down to business really quickly. But
they like to get down to business really quickly. Every time I go out, this is not to say anything negative about men in general, but every time I go out with men, I mean socially, all they do is talk about business. All they do is talk about business. It is so boring. Don't do that. Use the opportunity. What are some books that you've read? What are some movies you've seen? Like, these types of questions are kind of interesting questions that people like to talk about. They like to talk about what they've read, what they're seeing at the theater. These types of questions.
Those are good. That's good. Because ultimately, in the end, when you build that relationship, it will pay off in the long term, and you will reap the benefits in your business.
Right. I just want to add one kind of a caveat to that, which I've talked about in my book also, and especially today. I would say, if you can, you want to talk about general topics, but you want to stay away from politics.
I knew you were going to say that.
Here's why. Let's say you are a Democrat, and then you bring up the topic of politics, right? Well, maybe your client is a, really dyed-in-the-wool Republican. It's not going to sit well. It's not going to sit well. Even if you and your client are in violent agreement about politics and what should be done, somebody else who works at that company may not agree with you. Like, maybe your client does, but the person who works for him doesn't agree with you. This is just not something you really want out there. So if you can, it's likely, I'm going to be honest, it's likely to come up because everybody's talking about politics today. But I would say do your best, without being rude, to steer away from the conversation. Say something light about it, like, we could spend 4 business dinners talking about that, but I'd much rather ask you, have you seen any great movies lately? Here's something I saw that really interested me. Try to veer the conversation away from it.
Yep, that's perfectly acceptable.
It's always been, like, from time immemorial, people have always said, don't talk about politics at the dinner table, and don't talk about religion at the dinner table either. These things are more true today, these nuggets of wisdom are more true today than they ever were before. So if it comes up, just be polite, be lighthearted about it, but try to steer the conversation away to lighter, more fun topics.
Mm-hmm. Yep, with a client, that's important. What
Yeah.
about some mistakes, Vicky, that you've seen, some etiquette mistakes that could ultimately, at worst, maybe get you fired? But let's talk about something, mistakes that could actually cost you a promotion or worse. Have you seen any of those?
Okay. Oh, yes, but I mean, my basic thing here, my little tidbit of information is to be careful actually with information. So you don't want to be the purveyor of false information.
False
Let's
information, right?
say let's say you have a meeting with a client and you come back, let's say they're a potential client, you come back and you say, "Oh, that meeting was fantastic. We definitely won the account." Right?
Uh-huh.
That's the type of false information until it is confirmed that you have won that account. Don't broadcast that you've won the account. Similarly, if you're in an elevator, sometimes a boss will turn to you and say, "So, Vicky, what are you working on?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the tendency might be to tell your boss what you're working on in great detail in that elevator, but there could be somebody else in the elevator. Let's say somebody is working at one of your competitors. Somebody might overhear what you're saying in an elevator or actually anywhere, like in a public setting,
Mm-hmm.
and that could really cost you your promotion. You have to be very careful about information. And I know we've all heard it till we're blue in the face, but I mean, especially also on social
On
media.
social media,
You don't want to be
exactly.
saying, "Oh, we won this account" on social media before it actually happened.
And then the underlying theme here or takeaway is to make sure you reflect on who should know this, who can know this before you say it out loud.
Right. And don't be, just because, a boss, let's say, asks you in an elevator, "How did the meeting go?" Okay. You want to tell him or her how it went because it went super well. Don't. Instead, say, "I'd love to talk to you about that. Let's make a quick appointment later today. What time can I drop into your office and chat with you about it?" That's the best way to handle it, even if the news is spectacular.
Mm-hmm. That's good. And there's a plus side to that, or a benefit to that too. If you have some one-on-one exclusive time with anyone in senior leadership or anyone your superiors, that's good for you professionally.
Absolutely. I mean, just remember that an elevator is an in-between space. It's taking you somewhere. It's not an office. So don't get into details about your day or what you're working on, your projects with anybody in an elevator. It's just not a good idea.
All right, Vicky, what about addressing conflict? Because it'll come up, and there's a good way, maybe multiple good ways and multiple bad ways to address conflict. What is your opinion?
Right. So it's inevitable that just working with people, you are going to have disagreements with people that you work with. It's just an unfortunate fact of life. So, it could be daily, it could be weekly, it could be monthly. It depends on the culture where you work. But a couple of thoughts. When you disagree with somebody, I believe it is better to get up and walk down the hallway, knock on the person's door, and say, "Hey, do you have a minute? Let's chat about this," rather than doing it through email.
Email.
The
Yes,
problem
thank
with email is that the tone quickly erodes, and often you find yourself in a flame email war with somebody that you're working with, and that's just unprofessional. So if
And it
you
wastes time. It wastes everybody's time.
it wastes everybody's time, but more importantly, email never goes away. It's like a legal document. So if you're sitting there using all capital letters and exclamation points, or you're receiving emails like that from somebody that you work for or a colleague of yours, this should be a sign to you. Walk away from the screen. Don't reply to the email. Walk away. Walk down the office and make an appointment to see that person, even if you have to wait 3 days to discuss the situation. Do it, because you don't want to get into these email problems at the office.
And I would add even the chat, because a lot of organizations have internal chat capacity. So don't even do the chat. Just
No.
like you said, go down to their office or pick up the phone too, because if there is a conflict, it needs to be addressed interpersonally, either face to face or voice to voice, so that you can
Right.
explain yourself in the words that sound the best.
Right. I mean, another thing is that when there are email flames being passed along, which will happen, try to tamp down the temperature on your emails. Remember words like thank you, please, cordially. Sign off with a best. It doesn't matter that you see the person every minute of the day. Still use those little tiny words that show that you're a polite person.
Great. Good advice. Okay, so last question, Vicky, along the same lines. If an employee, and especially those entry-level employees, if they have a complaint about their boss, what are the consequences for complaining about your organization? If there's something you don't like about your organization or your boss, what's a better way to express that, if there really is something to complain about?
I just think it's a good idea to be a little bit entrenched in a place before you start vocalizing your complaints. It's natural to have some complaints about someone you work for or with. That is normal. You're probably spending like 12 hours a day with a person, and everybody's flawed. And so it's normal to feel that way. But what we're talking about is expressing it.
Right.
You don't want to start griping and complaining about the people that you work for or with. A, it's a morale downer, and the other people who work with you are not going to like it. And B, it paints you as a gossip, and gossips have too much time on their hands. So if you're always sitting there griping about your boss, when it comes time to make cuts, you're going to be the person who's cut. They're going to say, "There's that person always gossiping in the corner. Obviously, that person isn't working hard enough. She's got too much time under her hands," and they're going to cut you. So I would say don't do it. Just hold it in, or gossip all you want with somebody who's never going to tell anybody, i.e., somebody that doesn't work with you, for you, or somebody that you're not working for. You can gossip all you want to your mom, but I wouldn't do it with the people on staff.
So your mom
would really wait at least a year before saying something even slightly negative about anybody that you work with.
So the 2 points that I would add is, aside from it taking away your time from actually working, when you talk negatively about somebody else, then the person you're talking to, the receiver, we've all been in this situation, is going to be thinking, are they talking about me in this way? Like, do they talk? I wonder what they're saying about me. And that really is a detriment to any relationships that you're trying to build at work. So there's that. And I would just add, too, that an exception to all this is if you feel like you are being maybe discriminated against or harassed. Like, those are things that need to be complained about. And then in that case, of course.
Yeah, right. That's true. That's a great point. There's some things unfortunately, you must bring forward. And one of them is sexual harassment. Like, you cannot just stand by if you are being sexually harassed, That said, one thing to do is if you feel like you're being harassed, you have to be very clear with the person.
And
like, I feel like you're trying to harass me. Stop doing it. Don't be mealy-mouthed about that. You have to come forward and say that.
Right.
But just something like you feel like your boss is lazy or doesn't know his stuff, that type of griping, I would not share that with the people that you work with.
Great. Yes. Good advice. Well, I hope this has been helpful. Vicky, thank you for joining us. You have a depth and breadth of knowledge, so I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for bringing forth this important conversation about business etiquette.
Great. All right, we'll catch up with you another time, Vicky. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect.